Jamie, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. You good?
Yeah, I am, but I just get ever so confused when I hear government figures. I heard Nadine Dorries a few weeks ago quoting a very high number of those in intensive care that hadn't had the vaccine at all, and that when it was checked, turned out not to be true. So, Jamie, let's start with the basics. How many people have had jab 1, jab 2, or the booster in percentage terms?
Yeah, so we've got considerable numbers of people who had the first jab. It's approaching kind of 90% of people over the age of 12 or 12 and over, Nigel.
Yep.
And then when we start looking at people who've had the booster, the second dose and then the booster, obviously it starts to reduce. I've been looking at the numbers today in terms of the booster, and we've had 325,000 new doses in the last 24 hours, about 33.1 million people overall. And I think the point you made when you was doing the introduction there was about who needs the booster. It might be slightly different to the people who need the booster by the number of people who is eligible for the booster. So we currently know that around 13.3 million people who are over the age of 18 who had the second dose have not yet had a booster.
Yeah.
Now, sadly, some of those would have died since having the booster, so obviously you're not going to get the full take-up with that. But I think the important thing is who needs to have the booster, because with the Omicron variant showing that it's far less deadly and it's looking pretty positive with the information we're getting from Denmark and South Africa. It's the question is how many young people need a booster is different to how many can have the booster.
Yeah, I mean, if there are 13 million of us who are double jabbed, who've not yet had the booster, despite the biggest advertising campaign I think I've ever seen, wraps on newspapers, bus shelters, letters, texts, goodness knows what, then there's a lot of people in my position asking questions. Jamie, when it comes to those in hospital with COVID, with or without vaccinations or boosters, I think there's a slight confusion in the figures here, isn't there? Because as I understand it, quite a lot of people in hospital and in intensive care who are there because they've got COVID actually went in for different reasons and contracted COVID whilst they were actually in hospital.
Well, yeah, Nigel, and we've seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks kind of this propaganda campaign from ministers and it's on both sides of the kind of fence as well. We had somebody on the radio yesterday from the Conservative MP saying that 99% of all the deaths recently were people who were unvaccinated, and that's not true. It's less than 30%. But remember now, the vast majority of people are kind of vaccinated in the country, so that's not a surprise. But Boris Johnson, Sajid Javid, Nadine Dorries, all the ministers are going out trying to claim that the majority of patients in ICU are unvaccinated. And the figures that we do have shows that 48% of patients in ICU, that's the latest data that we have, are unvaccinated. Now, they are slightly overrepresented, but we also know, Nigel, that people who are obese are significantly overrepresented as well, and we don't seem to have the same discussions around those. Now, if we start looking at the hospitals,
let's just drill back down, please, if I can, Jamie, into that number. So the last accurate statistics you've got are that 48% of those in ICU are unvaccinated.
Yeah, that's the latest figure that we have, and it will vary across the country, Nigel, but that's the accurate figure that we've got. And we hear ministers go on saying 9 out of 10, and Boris today was talking about people who are in intensive care who've not had a booster. I think it's a bit disingenuous for him to be going on talking about that, because obviously a lot of people may not have had a chance to have the booster yet.
Jamie, thank you for that. Really very, very useful indeed.